Welcome to Chapter 7, Microbial Biochemistry, Section 2, Carbohydrates. Learning objectives. Give examples of monosaccharides and polysaccharides. Describe the function of monosaccharides and polysaccharides within a cell. The most abundant biomolecules on Earth are carbohydrates. From a chemical viewpoint, carbohydrates are primarily a combination of carbon and water, and many of them have the empirical formula CH2O, enclosed in parentheses, N, where N is the number of repeated units. This view represents these molecules simply as hydrated carbon atom chains in which water molecules attach to each carbon atom, leading to the term carbohydrate. Although all carbohydrates contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, there are some that also contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and/or sulfur. Carbohydrates have myriad different functions. They are abundant in terrestrial ecosystems, many forms of which we use as food sources. These molecules are also vital parts of macromolecular structures that store and transmit genetic information in DNA and RNA. Spoiler alert, that would be the sugar ribose involved in DNA and RNA. They are the basis of biological polymers that impart strength to various structural components of organisms, such as cellulose and chitin. They are the primary source of energy storage in the form of starch and glycogen. Monosaccharides, the sweet ones. In biochemistry, carbohydrates are often called saccharides, from the Greek saccharon, meaning sugar, although not all saccharides are sweet. The simplest carbohydrates are called monosaccharides, or simple sugars. They are the building blocks, so monomers, for the synthesis of polymers, or complex carbohydrates, as will be discussed further in this section. Monosaccharides are classified based on the number of carbons in the molecule. General categories are identified using a prefix that indicates the number of carbons and the suffix ose, O-S-E, which indicates a saccharide. For example, triose, 3 carbons, tetrose, 4 carbons, pentose, 5 carbons, and hexose, 6 carbons, as illustrated in this figure. The hexose D-glucose is the most abundant monosaccharide in nature. Other very common and abundant hexose monosaccharides are galactose, used to make the disaccharide milk sugar lactose, and the fruit sugar fructose. Monosaccharides of 4 or more carbon atoms are typically more stable when they adopt cyclic or ring structures. These ring structures result from a chemical reaction between functional groups on opposite ends of the sugar's flexible carbon chain, namely the carbonyl group and a relatively distant hydroxyl group. Glucose, for example, forms a 6-membered ring. Disaccharides. 2 monosaccharide molecules may chemically bond to form a disaccharide. The name given to the covalent bond between 2 monosaccharides is a glycosidic bond. Glycosidic bonds form between hydroxyl groups of the 2 saccharide molecules, an example of the dehydration synthesis described in the previous section of this chapter. Did I say that dehydration synthesis was very common in biology? Well, it is. Common disaccharides are the grain sugar maltose, made of 2 glucose molecules, which makes it well suited for making beer, the milk sugar lactose, made of a galactose and a glucose molecule, and the table sugar sucrose, made of a glucose and a fructose molecule. Alright, here I would like to introduce you to a little segment I like to do in some of these lectures, which is to recognize some of the common myths that are believed in the public. One of which is that you can have a sugar addiction, like a physical, actual addiction to sugar. And here is our old friend, the Goop website, with an article talking about overcoming sugar addiction. So do you think it's really possible to be addicted to sugar, like chemically? Survey says, no, not so much. So in this review article, just skipping down to the conclusion, Given the lack of evidence supporting it, we argue against a premature incorporation of sugar addiction into the scientific literature and public policy recommendations. So that's the TLDR on this, is that no, sugar addiction isn't real. Eating addictions can be real, and we know that, but physical addiction to actual sugar, no. You need sugar to make ATP to be alive. Every cell needs it. I mean, you can alter other chemicals to enter that cycle, but glucose is like the best thing ever for anything to eat. For most anything to eat. I'm sure there are exceptions. For animals, it certainly is. Glucose is fantastic for keeping us alive and allowing us to do things like move around. Okay, so back to polysaccharides. Polysaccharides, also called glycans, are large polymers composed of hundreds of monosaccharide monomers. Unlike mono and disaccharides, polysaccharides are not sweet, and in general, they are not soluble in water. Like disaccharides, the monomeric units of polysaccharides are linked together by glycosidic bonds. Polysaccharides are very diverse in their structure. Three of the most biologically important polysaccharides, starch, glycogen, and cellulose, are all composed of repetitive glucose units, although they differ in their structure. Cellulose consists of a linear chain of glucose molecules and is a common structural component of cell walls in plants and other organisms. Glycogen and starch are branched polymers. Glycogen is the primary energy storage molecule in animals and bacteria, whereas plants primarily store energy in starch. The orientation of the glycosidic linkages in these three polymers is different as well, and as a consequence, linear and branched macromolecules have different properties. Modified glucose molecules can be fundamental components of other structural polysaccharides. Examples of these types of structural polysaccharides are N-acetylglucosamine, or NAG, and N-acetylmuramic acid, NAM, found in bacterial cell wall peptidoglycan. Polymers of NAG form chitin, which is found in fungal cell walls and in the exoskeleton of insects. And that brings us to the end of Section 2, the carbohydrates. Join me next time for Section 3, lipids. In biochemistry, carbohydrates are often called saccharides, from the Greek saccharon. From the Greek, saccharon. Needs to be a hero in something. Saccharon to the rescue or something. Maybe as a villain. Okay, let's fake some kind of a Greek pronunciation here.